Production of Swansong is supported by viewers like you. Thank you. This episode focuses on a pair of games based on the critically acclaimed psychological horror manga Uzumaki by Ito Junji, which was serialized in the Big Comic Spirits weekly manga magazine from January 1998 to August 1999. As your friendly neighborhood Naruto fan has no doubt informed you by now, Uzumaki is the Japanese word for spiral, and the entire manga takes place in the small town of Kuro Uzucho. This town is cursed by the Uzumaki Sennin, or the Spiral Mountain Hermits, which set off bizarre supernatural events involving spiral patterns. Citizens of the town become fascinated by spirals to the point of obsession and eventually death. The manga follows high schooler Kirie and her boyfriend Shuichi as they witness the horrors inflicted on the citizens, including their own families and even themselves, and ultimately they try to plan their escape. Both WonderSwan titles discussed today were developed and published by the production company Omega Maikot, which was responsible for the production and release of the Uzumaki live-action movie adaptation in February of 2000. Both games contain explicit references to the movie adaptation of Uzumaki, and I suppose these games could be considered promotional material for the movie. More recently, in 2019, a 4-episode Uzumaki anime adaptation was announced to be coming to Adult Swim's Toonami programming block, animated by Studio Drive. It was originally meant to air in 2020, but it was then delayed twice to 2021 and October 2022. In June, it was delayed indefinitely as the staff did not want to compromise on quality and deliver a mediocre final product. Released a week before the live-action film adaptation on February 3, 2000, Uzumaki Denshi Kaikihen, loosely translating to Uzumaki Bizarre Digital Vision, is technically the first ever adaptation of Uzumaki to a different medium, in this case, visual novels. To be perfectly clear, this is an adaptation of the first 3 chapters of the Uzumaki manga, played in portrait orientation with background art on the bottom half of the display. Primarily, we're talking about character portraits during dialogue and environmental art. The only form of interactivity throughout this game is choosing the occasional dialogue option, which does not meaningfully change anything in the story. More tense moments in the story are accompanied by some creepy ambient background music, though much of the story is told in silence with nothing else but the page-turning sound. Many Westerners might think this is a bit too rudimentary to be considered a visual novel, but I don't think we necessarily have the best perspective on the genre, seeing as how we pretty much missed out on 20 years of games prior to the genre seeing any kind of mainstream availability in the West. Much like Terrors, which I've talked about on the past episode, there does seem to be a lot of influence coming from Chunsoft's sound novel series here, specifically Otogiriso from 1992 and Kamaitachi no Yoru from 1994, horror-themed visual novels for the Super Famicom with a heavy emphasis on atmospheric audio as part of their presentation. The presentation of the game is quite nice, and much like it was the case for Tetsujin 28-go, the black and white manga art translates very nicely to the WonderSwan's monochrome display. As a piece of software, it's well executed, especially considering that this was pieced together by a tiny team within a movie production company and not an established visual novel studio. As a delivery method for Uzumaki's story, though, I can't really recommend it. In the manga, each chapter is roughly 30 pages long. In the game, the first 2 chapters of the manga, the Spiral Obsession Parts 1 and 2, were crammed into the first 7 to 8 minutes of the game prior to the title screen, and the rest of the roughly 90-minute reading session is a really drawn-out retelling of the 3rd chapter, The Scar. Sometimes pictures really are worth 1,000 words, but that doesn't mean you can replace a picture with any 1,000 words and have the same impact. The Scar, like most chapters of Uzumaki, is a vignette about a specific victim of the spiral curse, and it's punctuated by beautifully grotesque half and full page illustrations that will creep the hell out of you. Even throughout the rest of the panels, a lot is conveyed in the art that isn't explicitly said in dialogue, and one of the challenges in this kind of adaptation is translating that extra visual information into words when you aren't able to present it in its full illustration form. Unfortunately, the game adaptation constantly misjudges what needed more detail. There's a lot of stuff in here that feels like padding for length, adding no value whatsoever to the scene. Then you'll see something that is absolutely beautifully executed in the manga fall completely flat because it wasn't fleshed out at all to make up for the lack of detail in the art due to the WonderSwan's low resolution or the limited quantity of art that can be shown due to cartridge size. This isn't a source material issue, this is purely an adaptation issue. Despite not liking most horror media, I decided to read the Uzumaki manga while researching this episode, and I found myself to be fascinated by it, not unlike the townspeople of Kurouzucho being drawn in by the spirals. On the one hand, I'm not surprised that a manga as visually striking as Uzumaki didn't fare well to this type of adaptation, but on the other hand, I never expected it would be quite this bad. It's a pacing disaster and should be avoided unless you're a big Uzumaki fan who's curious about how bad it is. If Denshi Kaikihen let you observe some of the events taking place in the Uzumaki manga, then Uzumaki no Roi Simulation, translating to Uzumaki Curse Simulation, lets you be an active participant in the misery of the citizens of Kurouzucho. It was released a month later on March 4th, 2000. This game tasks you with being one of the Spiral Mountain Hermits that curses the town of Kurouzucho. Each scenario requires you to summon a certain number of spirals to the town. The main game loop consists of observation, spiral item acquisition, and spiral item placement. From the town map screen, you can visit different locations. Certain locations will have observable events, such as the people having a conversation, people moving from one location to another, or just cutscenes of various plot beats from the manga. By paying attention to these events, you can piece together which locations around town would be good targets for a curse. At other locations, you'll find items with a spiral theme or pattern. You can take those items into your inventory, and planting these items at the correct location are the primary way you progress the game. Once you think you've figured out where you should be targeting the curse, you can go there and use one of the items you've collected. You start with 3 life points, or 2 if you ask to be given a hint at the start of the level. Planting an item in the wrong location will cause you to lose a life point. Guess correctly, however, and the spiral level for that location will increase by a significant amount. Doing this should cause more weird events to open up around town, and the townspeople will gradually get more nuts, so you should keep repeating until you reach your spiral quota for that scenario. While Denshi Kaikihen keeps the dramatic tone of the manga, Noroi Simulation is much more lighthearted and comedic. Don't get me wrong, there's still plenty of misery and body horror, but since you're viewing it through the eyes of the antagonists, that's just entertainment to them. At the very start of the game, your mountain hermit mentor outright tells you to go read the manga or the manual to go find out who the characters are because he can't be bothered to tell you himself. In the first level, he gives you one of 2 self-referential items to start the game with, either a poster or a ticket to the Uzumaki live-action movie. It's just very goofy and playful. On the narrative front, the game structure allows the developers to tell more than one story in parallel, as you'll often be observing different people in different parts of town at the same moment in time. This lets them make references to different chapters within the same in-game scenario, so there's more for serious fans to pick up on than if they're locked into a single chapter for most of the game's length, like in Denshi Kaikihen. Of the 2 games, I'd say Noroi Simulation is a far more interesting game. It's not just trying to be a lesser vehicle for Uzumaki's plot beats, it's taking them and remixing them with a completely different perspective and wrapping them with some light problem solving. I can't say I had much fun playing this one, but I have a hell of a lot more respect for what it was trying to do.